and welcome back to Devlog. In the last part, I worked on the redesigning of the player character's visuals and also the updating or creation of the skating animations. And in this part, I work on the newer character design, I did it again, and also a system for calculating rope movements within Unity without the use of any physics systems. Now this devlog is going to go incredibly into detail on two very different aspects of this week's development. So I have timestamps in the description, as I always do, and if you are more interested in one of these aspects of development, you can click around to the part that you feel the most interested in. Don't feel the need to watch through the half-an-hour modeling section. You can skip to the rope section if you want to. But to start, I will go over the redesigning of the player character, and then I will go over how I created the rope system, and finally I will talk about why I even did it in the first place. There's a big reason for that. The first thing I did this week is redesign my player character, as you can see on the screen right now. This character looks oddly familiar, but let's go into that part after I talk about the character design. You may be asking why I redesigned the character for the fourth time, and that is because I wanted something really stylized and cool for my game, so I just made this character. As I said in the previous devlog where I talked about designing animal characters, I said that they are more interesting than human characters because you can have a lot more varied styles of the character's face and visuals, and then I had an idea. What if I designed human characters with more stylistic intent on their features? So that's what this is. It does look very similar to the initial character designed for this game, but with a bit more stylization, I think. I think there's some more exaggeration of features, and I think it comes across a little bit more stylized than it originally was, and a little bit more unique than it originally was. It's also blue. My design for these characters was from a combination of 3 different setups. It was from the game Wind Waker, it was from the game No Straight Roads, which I haven't actually played, I just really like the character designs for, and from the game Psychonauts, which I haven't actually played, I really like the character designs for it though. Essentially, I felt like these had an overly stylized view of what the characters could be in these game spaces, and while also making them look satisfying and unique. So I wanted to do something very similar for my character setups, where they had a very exaggerated features, very exaggerated body parts, and very exaggerated faces. And the way I did this is by adding a sketch of the character's face, and all I did for this, when designing what the character's face would look like, is I drew a circle, and then I drew a triangle, and then I made the entirety of the face shape using nothing but circles and triangles. So this character's face is made up of a variety of circles and a variety of triangles. It's more easy to see in the concept artwork that I'm not going to show you because it would require video editing to cut to that view, so just trust me that it exists. The head shape in general is a big circle with a triangle put at the bottom for the chin. The ears are just big circles. The eyes are made of a composition of different triangles. That's why they look more pointy and have the eyeliner just coming off the side. The little white flecks of light in the eye are big triangles. The iris in themselves are just big circles. That one I didn't have a lot of creative freedom on. Irises are just generally kind of circles. Actually, there is that popular webcomic, Ava's Demons, that does have obscure shape-based irises, so maybe I will rip that off for future characters. Who's to say? The mouth is just 2 big triangles. It's very wide and pointy. It's a wide pointy triangle mouth, and the nose is basically just a triangle with a circle on the end. And the hair, if you look at its base form, is just a bunch of big circles plopped onto the character's head. And that's how I made my character. I love her. And then the character's horn is jutting out of their forehead. Why does the character have a horn? An excellent question. Well, I used to have a devlog series for a game called Proto Beat, where the characters were cute little blue demon girls. I then ditched that devlog completely and started making this devlog series, Grelath. They're the same game, I just made the old character in this new format. I gave her a fresh little new model. It's the same character. This is an earlier character for an earlier game I designed. I'm just bringing them back for this game with an updated model in this game's engine. I spent 17 weeks completely remaking my old game's game engine as a joke. As for the character's bodily proportions, I was originally designing them to go for something more of a like a skinny, lanky sort of style, but as you can see from the character's T-pose now, and especially when they're wearing clothing, they actually look kind of chunky. I really like this design for this specific character. I actually think it fits them quite well. They have this really slight, sharp, angular face, but their hands and feet are really big and bulky, and they have sort of a more thicker bodily proportion when they have the clothing on. When I remove the clothing, you can definitely see they have some more angular bodily features, like the legs just kind of go into the feet in like this big blocky way, or the arms are more pointed. It's more so the clothing, I think, softening them, so depending on what costume I put this character in might depend on how their final body form looks, but I quite like this style. I like that the character looks kind of short and stocky. Maybe the other characters that I designed for the game, or the other body types I designed for the game, would be the complete opposite. That brings me organically to talk about other characters and other character designs. As I have mentioned offhandedly, I'm either adding creator characters to my game, meaning the player can just make whoever they want and play as them, or I will add different playable characters that you can play as. Either way, I will just make a variety of different body, face, head types for these that the player can pick from. So this is an example of a character that was made with circles and triangles, but I could make a similar character in this art style with something like squares, so they could have a big square head and maybe like a curved nose or something. I don't know, I haven't designed them yet. The point is, I really want all of the human characters or humanoid characters that will be playable, or body types you can choose from, to be incredibly varied in this art style. However, this is really hypothetical at this point, so in the future there will be other characters. Hopefully these characters will be more visually distinct than this character is, and they will look completely different next to each other. Now, if you don't think the character is stylized enough, let's look at the player's facial emotions. I made significantly less this time because I haven't been using the facial emotions so far, so I didn't really want to waste my time this week making a bunch of extra facial emotions that I don't currently need. The character can blink, which I think with the eyeliner looks pretty cool. The character can look left, right, up and down. These are a bit more exaggerated. The eyes definitely bulge out and shift around in a more exaggerated, cartoony way than they would initially. The character can be sad. This is very much more animated. I'm going to open up my version of Blender now so that I can vocally record as I look at it, because I record the audio and the video for these segments separately. Let's look at it. The sad emotion has it's not the most exaggerated, but it's still pretty exaggerated. The eyebrows go up, the cheeks very pushed up in a very exaggerated manner, and the mouth has this little I'm not sure what emotion that is, but it's one of those emotions. And finally, I have the happy emotion. I love how this turned out. You may note that the character ends up getting stars in their eyes. The visual trick for this is that in normal emotions, I will have these stars as planes behind the eyeballs, as well as other little symbols that I may use for other emotions, like a heart. And then in the happy shape key, I just bring these out so they are in front of the irises and you can see them more visually. The character gets really happy with their mouth. They have a really, really exaggerated grin on their face. Their teeth are showing a little bit. You can see their tongue. It's a huge, huge mouth shape. This is also why I redesigned this character's face somewhat. I needed to accommodate larger mouth openings. Essentially, I needed the players to be able to accommodate their mouths opening really, really wide for exaggerated mouth emoting. It's also the same reason I made the eyeballs so big on this character. If you have a big mouth and a big eyeball, you can do a lot of emoting. It's why I never emote. My eye and mouth are just too small. The eyes themselves are really exaggerated in their posing, and the eyebrows themselves are really exaggerated in their posing to really overly emphasize how happy the character looks. It isn't just a regular character emote of mild happiness. It is, this character is so pleased, they just don't know what to do with their old dang old self. They're just so happy and excited right now. Look at that dang old face. And that's what I was going with this animation. Next, let's talk about texturing. If you have seen some of my other devlogs, you may know that I like to use a gradient texture palette, and that is for a couple of reasons. The first being that I think it gives a variety of colors and techniques that you can use with just a regular gradient pattern to the character. And secondly, and more importantly, sometimes I get too lazy to draw characters' textures, and this is a lot easier to do. If you are unfamiliar with how this works, all you do is you get your character, you project their UVs from your viewpoint, which is just whatever the character looks like on the current viewpoint of the 3D engine. You then flatten these along one axis, and then you project these along a color gradient pattern. As you can see from the last view, I have a lot of gradients. I just pick and choose between whichever one of these I think suits the character the most, and that is what their coloring is based on. This also makes it very easy to retexture or recolor my characters, because all I do is I drag this current view of what the character's UVs are left or right, and they will change the colors completely. It makes color theory very easy. Do I want the character to have red skin? Do I want the character to have green skin? Do I want the character to have blue skin? I can very easily switch between these and check which looks best. In order to get more detail onto certain areas, I will just stretch the UV in certain positions. For example, the UVs for the hands and the feet are stretched incredibly more downwards than the body UVs, and the UVs for the character's horn is stretched more upwards. This means that the color of the horn is higher on the gradient texture, and the colors for the hands and feet are lower on the gradient texture. That's how I get the hands and feet to look darker, and how I get the horn to look lighter. I use a similar trick with the eyeball. I take one point of the eyeball's inner texture, I will stretch that out on one axis, and then I will flatten the eyeball and project this onto another gradient texture. I'll then take the outer ring of the eye and do the same with projecting that onto a different texture color, and that's how I get the iris's neat little gradient pattern and gradient color. I actually really like how this looks for the iris. Usually with these kind of art styles, I usually have a bit of difficulty in deciding what I want the character's eyes to look like. I always feel like if I have them too detailed, it will make the art style be a bit more reduced, but if I don't have them detailed enough, it will look a bit odd on the character's face, and just getting the irises to match with the art style. So I think using this gradient pattern is a pretty neat way of doing that. The only issue with this is they don't have the blacks of the pupils in the irises. But I suppose with the art style, you can kind of forgive the characters for not having pupils. You just kind of look at it, see the pretty colors, and say, wow, that's pretty cool, that's pretty neat, I don't care about the scientific inaccuracies that it looks okay is what I'm getting at. I'll stop with the annoying voice. For the hair, I just do the exact same thing. I stretch parts in different directions, and then I unwrap this in the same way to have this nice little gradient pattern. As far as the material in-game goes, it's very similar. I just use a different set of gradient patterns to delegate what the shading colors are. These are just this current texture, but with the hues switched and the saturations altered, and then I use this and I blend between the regular colors and this color as a multiplication value onto what the character's skin is, and then it makes a nice little smooth material. Okay, now we can talk about rope physics. So the first thing that the rope needs to achieve with its fake physics simulation is to calculate the point from the beginning of the rope to the end of the rope and calculate any tension that will be built on this tether. The tension that is created on this rope is when the first point and the last point of the rope cannot see each other in a raycast situation. At this point, we will have a raycast sent from the Tension is added when the source of the rope, this being the end of it that is moving, cannot see the last point of the rope, this being the last tension point in the rope. More of these are added as the rope goes on. If there isn't any tension points, we just check from the base of the rope. If we cannot see the last point of the rope, we'll add another tension point at this point that there has been a collision. We will then calculate around corners with this tension point using another system that I'll get onto. And then, if we can see these points and the last point of our script, we will remove tension points from our string or our rope as we are able to release tension and see other collision points on our rope. And that's how it works in BASIC. Now let's get on to the complicated explanation. So our rope scripting works with a looping set of systems. We move, we check if there is any collision from our current point to our last points. If there is no collision, we will check if there is any way that we can see from our current point to the point beyond our last points. Essentially, if there is any way to see from where our rope current ends to the point before the last point. So if we're going around a corner with our rope, we'll check if we have cleared this corner going backwards and we can see the point before the corner. If we can, we'll release the tension from our corner point because we have passed it, and this point in our scripting will be deleted and not regarded anymore. There is a slight extra check in this system where if we cannot see the point before our current tension point but we are incredibly close to our current tension point, we will just remove it anyway and regard to our last point of tension. This is for essentially only a check if there is an error in our rope tension. Because if we have reached our last point of our rope tension and we cannot see the point beyond that, we should have been able to, so therefore we will just remove this tension point and revert back to our last tension point. And if we can't see that tension point, we will then run the first part of our script, which I will now explain. As we are moving, if we cannot see our last tension point, we will send a ray from our current position to our last tension point. We will check for any hit collision at that point, and we will apply tension to this point. If this point is on a surface that could have a corner to it, which it most likely will, we will then calculate a angle based on our current tension point that we have just hit and our last tension point outwards based on a trigonometry calculation that I will also explain in a moment. This doesn't come up much, but it's basically just if we cannot calculate correctly from our hit position to our next position and we need to go around a corner, or we need our rope to curve around a corner that could be at a harsh angle like a right angle. Smooth corners don't really have this issue, but in these instances, if we do have these issues, our character will add a calculation for tension to go around a corner. This script then loops in on itself, so as our character goes, we run the script again. If we can see the last point, we run the point checking to check if we can remove this point of tension. If we cannot see our last point of tension, we will run our scripting to add more points of tension as we cannot see our last point of tension. This helps to clear up any issues dynamically with our rope scripting because we are always continuously checking our point of tension and how our rope is working based on our movements. This script is actually pretty clean as far as the calculations go, because all we need to do is check from our current point position to our last position, this being the last point of tension. We don't need to check any of these other points of tension because logically they probably should be still working the same unless I have wildly moving scenery, but I don't really plan on having moving geometry that much, and even if I did, the point of tension move with the geometry, so it shouldn't cause too many issues. The point is that all we are doing is having one complicated check from one point to another point instead of a bunch of checks from a bunch of different positions, and it saves on a lot of system space. Because ultimately all this check is doing is going from our current point to our last point back and forth a couple of times and having some of the calculations, and that isn't very strenuous on the computer. It's not very strenuous on my computer. Let's talk about triangles. As I have mentioned, using trigonometry to calculate around the corners of surfaces of objects when we add tension to them. The way you could imagine this is, let's say we're walking around a big cube, as is evidence in this footage. We have a tension point on one side of the cube, we walk around to the other side of the cube, we add another tension point. What we need to have is a tension point added at the corner of these cubes where one side meets the other side. Now, if we imagine this point, we have our points on our current point of tension that we've just made on our side of our cube. We have the original on the other side of the cube, and we have the triangle edge between these that we need to get the point of. If you imagine these as just 3 points, they just make a triangle. So all we have to do is calculate the triangle that these points make, and then we'll have the final point of this triangle based on the distance of the sides of this triangle. Luckily, we can use trigonometry to easily calculate the surfaces of this triangle. All we have is the distance from our current position of our tether to our last position of our tether. This is the base of the triangle, and we just need to have the distance between these two. This is easily calculated with a vector dot distance. And then we have the angle of the triangle's points next to our hit position and next to our last tether position. If you're wondering how we calculate this, all we do is a mathematical calculation of our hit normals of our surface, this being the surface that we hit, based on the direction from one point to another. This calculates an angle, and then we just have this angle minus 90 degrees, and then we have the angle of the triangle's surface based on this calculation. Or is it 90 degrees minus the angle? The angle minus 90 degrees. It's one of those two, and then we have the angle of the triangle. This is the 2 base points of the triangle's angles, and then we can find the last angle of the triangle with 180 minus these 2 angle points, because a triangle has 180 degrees inside of it. And then, if you're unfamiliar with trigonometry, all we have to do is a simple mathematical calculation to calculate from the base of the triangle with one of the angles and the other angle, and then we can use the cosine of these angles. We just plug these angles and values into our mathematical calculation, and then we have the distance of our angle triangle sides. If you're at all curious as to what this mathematical calculation is for calculating the side of a triangle, you're kind of a nerd, aren't you? That's okay, so am I. We use the base of the triangle times by the sine of the angle A, this being the opposite angle of the side that we're trying to calculate, and we divide this by the math sine of the opposite angle from the triangle's base. So this would be side C times by the sine of side A, the sine of angle A, divided by the sine of side angle C. I know these things, but I always confuse names of things when explaining them. I very much promise that I am clever, I'm just stupid when I say words. And this is the mathematical algorithm for calculating the sides of our 2 angles. I will now talk about how we get the final point of the triangle, because it's a little bit more complex. Using these values and the angles, I run this setups of systems, which I'm hoping I'm putting on the video right now. So as you can see, we run a ray from our points, the intersection of the 4 colors, the 3 colors, the 4 colors, there is 4 colors. I can't count. The red ray, the yellow ray, the cyan ray, and the blue ray would be our ending of our hit points of our tether and our beginning of our hit points of our tether. These are the 2 tether points. The red ray is the direction from one point to another. The blue ray is the hit normals of these surfaces, this being the sides of the cube. The cyan rays are the calculations between the normals and the directions, and the yellow ray is our direction of our triangle sides based on the angles of our triangle. So you can see these always intersect around the corner of the cube. This is where our tether point is going to be placed based on our cube's angular trigonometry triangle. all we're doing to calculate the directions of these angles is we're doing values between 0 and 1 based on the angles of our triangle. So at 0 it's going to be one value, at 1 it's going to be another value. It's a classic LERP. And then we just extend in that direction based on these values of the mathematical triangle angles that we have found. So at the shorter angle we will extend more towards the red ray. At a larger angle we will extend more towards the blue ray, or this cyan ray. So if you have kept track of my ramblings, all we have now is the point of our triangle. We have the angle and direction to move in, this being the yellow rays, and we have the mathematical amount that we need to move in this direction, this being the triangle side. All we do now is plug all of these into a vector-free calculation of positioning, and we have our triangle's edge points that our tether should have tension at. And that's how I get my mathematical tension points on our tether system, of our rope system, of our rope grabbing system. This took a little bit of time to make, but it was fun. Being a big old maths nerd, I enjoy making things with trigonometry, so this was a fun project. This is my favorite part of the rope scripting. This is mostly just for any buggy collision when going around corners of surfaces, but it actually doesn't come up a huge amount when scripting, because the way that the hits normally work is they normally have enough room to just work without the use of trigonometry. But the trigonometry system is in place just in case there's an issue or we need extra collision points to go around corners. One error I had of this system is of an incorrect XZ placement. What was happening for some reason is that the triangles were calculating incorrectly and having their angles and positions be wildly inaccurate, and they were pulling the tether in a odd direction into the distance. I believe this issue was mostly because I was calculating the triangle's position based on the XYZ position of these hit points, so when there was a large amount of elevation from one position of the triangle to another, it was incorrectly calculating the triangle's angles and the triangle's sides. All I had to do now to fix this system was calculate our triangles on a flat surface, instead of using the calculation of the triangle hit points positions in XYZ space. I just minus out the Y and then have them all on a flat surface, so our triangles were calculated flatly. Next, when testing this, some of the ropes going around circle surfaces did not have as much of a smoother edge to them. This was pretty easy. It was just because of how the raycasts work when hitting objects. As long as they can see the last point or not see the last point, they're nulled out. So this reduces them a lot of unnecessary tether points on objects. Essentially it's just where ropes would gather tension around an object so it doesn't smooth out as much, and this is completely fine because the system doesn't have to be 100% accurate, but I did want it to be more visually appealing. So all I did in these instances is, if we have two tether points and they have completely different angular surfaces, this being their hit normals are vastly different, I will find a third point between these two and then will smooth out its position a little bit. The way I smooth out its positioning is I just use the hit normals of the original 2 points and I extend it slightly based on those, and then I just place a point at this point for the rope's tether to be on. This helps it look a whole lot more smoother when going around circular objects, but it doesn't really come up much visually if you're going across flat objects, because it doesn't really look a whole lot different. It may have a little bump in the rope, but all in all, it just makes the rope look a whole lot smoother when going across objects. Now, this system isn't 100% perfect, and that's fine because it doesn't need to be perfect. If you're going to calculate very precise and detailed rope physics, then you'd probably want to use something like Rigidbodies or actual physics systems in engine to really realistically calculate how these things work. But that's not what I'm using this system for, so I just need it for the mathematical system. For my game, I do not need a perfect rope physics visual. All I need is a vague approximation of how the physics of a rope will handle around a surface and how the tension of a rope will handle around the surface. This is because I'm using the rope for a movement system and not for a visual of rope. Wiggly rope. I don't need a wiggly physicsy rope. I need grappling hooky tension rope. And that's why there isn't things like rope hanging calculated, or the rope doesn't have perfect smoothing around corners, it only has the vague approximation of smoothing, things like that, because it's not really needed for this system. It doesn't really need to be precise as far as these hits go or what rope would actually do. It just needs to look and feel precise for the tension and the physics system of the player movement, which doesn't have physics, but you get the point. It just needs to sort of give the illusion of these things occurring without actually being all that complicated. Finally, I just plug these into a line renderer. This is pretty easy. Since the system of the rope generates points for its point of tensions, these being actual points in space, and it keeps a catalogue of these systems, all I have to do is, after this is done and we've calculated our rope, I just check each of these into the positions of a line renderer, and that makes a visual in space, in-game space. I could make an infinitely large mesh, or one of those stretchy ones with rigging in them, but well, I already made a game about that, so I don't really feel like doing that again. I'm just using a line renderer. I don't care very much. Now that all the detailed explanation of how I made the rope physics in-game, I shall now talk about why I made rope physics. Because I'm sure you're wanting an explanation, and it's not painfully obvious, and I'm just going to add grappling hooks. With the previous devlogs having things like skating and me wanting to add other equipment values like jet boots or weaponry or other equipment the player could have, this one is for grappling hooks and things of that nature, rope swinging, things like that. The player swings on ropes. So this current equipment setup is basically to accommodate for that. We need to accommodate for the player's movements and then have a physicsy, air quote, this entire point of this is that it doesn't have physics. I just use the term physics interchangeably with my physics and the Unity in-game physics. When I say physics, I'm talking about the physics I made and not the actual physics of the engine. The point of this was to make a physics system for the ropes, so that I could calculate the tension and the direction to pull the character when they are using rope swings or grappling hooks of that kind. The idea behind these is to either make a grappling hook system that works like the Titanfall grappling hook system, where it has a lot of momentum and velocity adding to your character, and you can like slingshot yourself around things if you use it intelligently. It's not just a point and shoot and you go there, it's a point and then you're getting a tension point attached based on your grappling hook and you're pulled based on that. Or like the rope swinging in classic anime's Attack on Titan, because I really like how the rope swinging in that looks. This, if you haven't seen popular anime's Attack on Titan, is you have two grappling hooks at your hips. One fires left, one fires right. They could either fire forward as well, or they can fire left and right. I guess also I could have just said like Spider-Man. That would have been an easier reference. This is a more directional based rope swinging thing. With grappling hooks, it's more you swinging from points, you swinging around points, things like that. They're more of a fast-paced thing that you can point and shoot continuously, while a grappling hook would be a one point and shoot and then a based on that. So those are the three types of rope swinging that you could have. well, I guess those are two types. I was counting the second type as two different types of rope swinging because you have your rope on your left hip and your rope on your right hip. I'm confusing the points. The point is that I want to add grappling hook systems and rope systems to the equipment setups, and this whole thing was to calculate the physics for how those will work. I will stop talking now because I've lost track of what the point is. My point was next week's development log will be the new equipment setup state of grappling hooks and how those are going to work with the character's movement system. Okay, bye. We've had a fun devlog. I'm recording this section before I record the section for the rope swing mathematical explanation, so I can only surmise this has been another excruciatingly long development log video. I'm very, very sorry. I can't summarize things very easily, and I have a habit of babbling on for longer than I need to. I hope you've enjoyed what is essentially becoming a podcast. Once again, very, very sorry for the long-winded nature. Maybe I could write these in blogs. This has been a super fun system to make. Ironically, I had actually originally made a devlog series about rope swinging, and I used Unity's Rigidbody system, and I hated it completely, and I swore never to make rope swinging or grappling hook systems in the game again, because it worked so poorly, and now we've come full circle, and I just made my own system. It's very retroactively satisfying to know that I just trounced my past self with what I've done this week. Take that, me from 9 months ago, you dumb bozo. It has also been a very fun development week of developments. I had a lot of fun redesigning my character. I had a lot of fun making my rope physics. I know I say this at the end of most of my videos where I sum up what I did and then how I enjoyed it, which probably is an unnecessary part of these devlogs because it always is. I had fun, but I really did. It's a super fun system to make. It's surprisingly a lot easier than it needs to be. I know I talked about trigonometry for a hottest minute. It's not as complicated as it seems. My system isn't even that complicated, and that's why it's janky, but I'm sure you could make this system a whole lot easier, because you probably don't have what I have, that being what I have being stupid brain. Let me know in the comments what equipment you would like to see in the game. No limits on that one. I'm literally adding anything I feel like it, so go nuts. Do you want a virtual pet sim added? I'll do it. And let me know in the comments what you'll like and subscribe. Bye.